Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Exploration Chats, brought to you by the Tourism for Tomorrow student organization from the George Washington School of Business. My name is Jeanette Thomas, and today I am super delighted to be joined by someone who's more like a Swiss Army knife within the tourism industry, Mr. Courth Whelan. He is currently the Director of Sustainability and Conservation Travel Programs at Natural Habitat Adventurers. He's also a public speaker, scientist, conservation biologist, a photographer, and hosts the podcast The Wildlife Photographer. He has also recently published a book titled The Monarch Migration, A Journey Through the Monarch Butterfly's Winter Home. And last but not least, he holds a Ph.D. in philosophy, ecotourism, and entomology from the University of Florida. So welcome to the first episode of Tourism for Tomorrow series. We are so grateful to have you with us.
Jeanette, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this is really exciting. Happy to be your first guest and happy to talk a little bit about, well, these very many directions I've taken in my life to kind of all converge together in this unique role that I currently serve in.
Yeah, I mean, so like, wow, this is quite a lot of topics that we can uncover. But first, I have to ask, like you mentioned, how did you go, like, getting to where you are right now? Like, I mean, it seems like you took a lot of turns, perhaps, a lot of diversions.
Yeah, I mean, yes, in a way, it probably is not so much of turns and pivots as it is just distilling down what I wanted to do into the exact kind of lifestyle, the exact career, the exact impact I wanted to have. It really all started, well, I mean, early on, I've always been super involved in education. I've always loved nature and the outdoors. But it really started with this idea, having this big epiphany moment on a trip to Belize that I took almost 20 years ago now, where I was like, I want to save the world by teaching people about natural places and biodiversity in location. I want to take people from their homes, from their classrooms, out in the field, and that's where they're going to get the biggest impact, the biggest learning. And so really it's just been starting with this big picture concept and whittling out, how do I do it? How do I carve my own path through that? So a couple of the sort of oddities that happened is I went the route of the entomology department. You know, I mean, that's not a very typical thing to go through, studying insects to doing ecotourism. Usually insects are the thing that freak people out about ecotourism. You know, it's what people don't want to see. But one of my big projects was to change that paradigm and get people really interested in the insects because, well, if anybody knows anything about, you know, insects and biodiversity, like insects kind of rule the world. So that was a big tack. But then as I got more involved in ecotourism, I again followed my passions, followed my abilities, and got very heavily into the guiding aspect. And then, of course, when you start traveling the world, you have a certain sense of curiosity about everything. You know, you don't want to just see monarch butterflies. You don't want to just see leafcutter ants in Costa Rica. You want to go on safari in Africa. You want to check out the tribes of Papua New Guinea and the islands of the Solomon Islands and Madagascar, you know, and everything in between. So yeah, it was sort of this big picture idea that did get distilled down into this path. And I just kind of seize any opportunity coming my way, if you know, kind of in sort of short summary version. So it has, yeah, I love your analogy of the Swiss Army knife. I wear a lot of hats, but I think that is a big part of, it's like a key ingredient to getting me in this unique position that I am today.
And absolutely, like, especially like during these times, like we need to not be focused on one thing. You need to diversify your skill set, you know. So another skill set of yours would be photography, like that goes along with your entomology that you did, which is quite brilliant. Definitely, I will be putting the link for your photography Instagram page where we're posting this. But is there any like current work that you're focusing on right now with your perhaps your organization?
Yeah, I mean, right now, so I am firmly in the travel industry, this conservation travel space. Like you said, I do have a few different roles, and have kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, hedged my bets over the years of exactly what my expertise is. So as travel declines, I still have the sustainability, the conservation, the photography, but I'm still firmly in the travel industry. So, you know, that is definitely a project of mine, is to get travel back up and running again, of course, safely, effectively. And it's a constant theme that what I want to do is get this idea of conservation travel, aka ecotourism, to be as effective as it can be. You know, there's a few ways it can be really effective. The most important, which I'm sure most in the audience knows, is ensuring that most of the money stays in the hands of local people. You want to get people also from various parts of the world to understand the cultures, the nature, the wildlife, And so that's the other half of the equation, is not just ensuring that tourism is done right in location, but finding people that I often say what we do is we try to influence the influencers of the world. We're choosing people that might be CEOs, not choosing, but we're marketing to people that might be CEOs, heads of family foundations. They're interested in conservation, but through this experience, we're sort of opening up a whole new world to them. And it's like this blank canvas of what we can teach them and inform them about, and what we can really wow them with, what we can blow their mind with by seeing, crazy biodiversity in Madagascar, or watching two polar bears spar in the Arctic, and then make that bridge to conservation concerns, deforestation, erosion in Madagascar, a warming Arctic up in, polar bear country. So yeah, it's a lot of different things sort of all at once. But to boil it down, it's like, what am I working on? It's really just getting tourism to function as one of the most powerful conservation tools out there on the planet today.
Well, and that goes to my next question. So like, obviously we're right now in a pandemic, and tourism was definitely one of the biggest industries that were hit by it. Especially in the wildlife ecotourism. Do you have like any predictions on how that's going to change, focusing on wildlife tourism, post the COVID scenario?
Yeah, I think that you know, it's probably more good than bad, to be honest. I mean, I think the post-COVID or the COVID era of travel, because it's not going to go away like a light switch. You can't just turn it off. But I think there's going to be more awareness to the fact that we all have limited time in our lives to go see the things, see the animals, see the nature, the wildlife, et cetera, et cetera. So people are going to want to do it. There's a crazy amount of pent-up demand, and people have said, I figured out going on an African safari later in life. And I think people are finding now that, like, if they have always wanted to go on an African safari, you never know what's going to be around the next corner with how pandemics, how economic distress, how whatever happens that can derail tourism for what we're seeing right now to be a year or even years. So I think that demand will come back in a really, really big way. I think that there will be quite a bit of attention paid to the illegal wildlife trade. There's a lot of evidence that was a major contributor to this pandemic, and that's good for conservation. That's good for wildlife ecotourism and conservation travel. That's really, really good. I think that in terms of one's behaviors, tourist behaviors in and around wildlife, that's something that we have always been trying to improve upon. And I think that this might call attention to a few specific cases of how we need to be a little bit more extra careful around wildlife. Gorilla trekking, chimpanzee trekking, these are close relatives of ours. They can absolutely get COVID. So I think that there's just more of a attention paid on our closest relatives out in the wild and how we can further protect them. But I think the biggest thing is really just going to be the pent up demand and people realizing that, hey, if there's something you want to go see it in the world, you should plan to go see it. Like, make it happen, kind of seize the day mentality. I think that's going to be the most tangible that we see.
But would that also be like a double-edged sword? Like, for example, like if there's like such a pent-up demand to see all this, wouldn't that like be a bit more harder to like control, or do you think it would be like a challenge in terms of sustaining it, of handling
There could be, yeah. I mean, that's definitely a concern. The topic of over-tourism was really, really big in the literature and in the trade conferences for the last few years. This current situation has put a damper on that. Obviously, we don't have over-tourism right now. We have under-tourism. I don't think there's an infinite supply of, we'll call it like tourism products, such that if the demand has doubled, you can't just automatically get twice as many people out there at the same time. I think what you're going to see is people booking further in advance. I think you're going to see more high occupancy rates, which makes businesses more efficient and productive. And for good tourism, good conservation travel, that basically translates to more money in the local community, in the country, in the region, which then creates more stakeholders in the local areas that serve to protect the areas that give them money more vehemently. They're gonna be their own conservationists. That's one of the things we try to do. So yeah, I think it's something we have to be very cognizant of, is that pent up demand doesn't turn into just, oh well, unlimited demand equals unlimited supply. But I think that most companies right now that are providing the hotels and the lodges and all that, either they don't have the capital to double their bed nights or whatever, or they're like, well, let's just see how this plays out. So I'm not too worried about it. I'll put it this way. I'm always worried about it. I'm not significantly more worried about it right now.
Right.
because
Because
of the pandemic. It's just a pervasive problem always.
it's like more people are aware right now about the harmful effects or what some habits that we had as humans were so wrong. We needed a pandemic to make sure that, all right, that was what we used to do before was not the right way, or like it was a bit too much. And now it's a bit more controlled. And obviously with the awareness and stuff that could help, especially in the tourism sector.
Yeah.
Hmm. So like I know you must have traveled a lot as well during your time in your career. Which is like your favorite location that you worked in, or something that meant so much for you?
Yeah, it's hard to say. So I have traveled a lot. I mean, one of the major hats that I wear is a tour guide or expedition leader,
Mhm.
as you'll call it. Um, and yeah, of all the places I've been, I have a particular fondness for. Well, I'd probably have to name like a top three, to be honest.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's hard not to have an African safari somewhere at the top of the list. It's so mesmerizing and so extraordinary. I love Madagascar. It's weird, it's wacky, it's unique.
Mhm.
I love Borneo. It's that sort of the same mentality, but big old rainforests. Incredible wildlife. It's got, when you look at tropical rainforests, normally you've got sort of like the small stuff like monkeys and beautiful tropical birds and butterflies, and they're beautiful. They're awesome. Like people go there just for that stuff, and they should. But Borneo has the other side of the spectrum where it's got, not just all that beautiful, colorful bird and butterfly and bug and that kind of stuff, but it also has the largest, or one of the largest monkey species, dozens of others. It's got a great ape. It's the only great ape outside of Africa with the orangutan. It's got pygmy elephants. So it's pretty extraordinary. And then I'll say maybe last, just because I can't not have it on the list somewhere, is the monarch butterfly migration. It's
Right.
one of those things that is so fantastic, so spectacular, that it's just, you could take anybody that has any love of nature or wildlife, and maybe they've never really been interested in butterflies or insects or anything like that, but they'll
Mhm.
they'll sit there and they'll say, wow, this is absolutely amazing. This is one of the coolest things I've seen in my life. So yeah,
Wow.
you asked for a top one and you got a top four.
No, that's great. I know sometimes you can't have a top. You might need to have a couple
Yeah,
more.
it's too hard to say.
Sure. But yeah, you mentioned about your book. What made you do that? Like that, I believe that was the first book that you published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a book on the monarch butterfly. It's the intention is to be, an aesthetic coffee table book, but also has some real deal information in it about the monarchs, their fascinating biology and natural history, some conservation issues, how ecotourism plays a part in saving the monarch butterfly, et cetera, et cetera. And it was really probably just because I've photographed these little things so much and I've guided down there so much, and it was a component of my dissertation for my PhD. I actually researched the monarch butterfly and effects of ecotourism on the monarch butterfly groves in Mexico. So I think that it was ready for it. I did a lot of literature review, I did a lot of studying, and I had it all ready to go. And I said, well, if I'm going to write a book, this is definitely the low hanging fruit. And probably the thing that really got it going is that I've been guiding down there for 17 or 18 years, and I probably have as many, if not more, photographs of the migration in different times of their season, in different settings than probably anybody else out there, just because I've been
Wow.
photographing vehemently the whole time, like, for 17
Wow.
years.
How long did you take to like get the book, like all the photos done and everything?
I want to say it took me about 10 minutes a week for 8 years.
Wow.
So
I
I never
mean,
worked, I never like sat down and just did everything all at
yeah.
once. But I just little by little knocked my way at it. I mean, a lot of the research and the findings were part of my grad school education. So it's many, many, many years, but I never really just sat down and said, okay, this weekend I'm going to do the whole thing or do this and that. It was just a labor of love for many, many years.
Wow. And one other thing that you really love is photography. And how did you pick your first camera, and how was that about?
Yeah, so back to that real pivotal trip in my life, my first real kind of like ecotourism trip to Belize. Um, it was like right at the advent of the digital age, and so there weren't many choices. And I saved up all my money from undergrad and got a 3 megapixel camera, which was state of the art at the time. And it just, I went with Canon because I don't know, it's probably the first camera I saw, but I've always stuck with them. And, I've probably had a dozen different cameras since that first one. And I just steadily upgraded.
Yeah.
get a used one, a little bit better one. And then, nowadays I'm at the point where I'm using it so much for my career, for my professional work, that yeah, I have a pretty good setup right now. And I'm actually, for the first time in many years, like I'm really happy with just like my whole lenses, my kit. Like I'm not constantly searching for the next one. But that was very um consistent throughout my photography career, is just getting more and more, um honing my kit, getting the better lens to get the better photographs, et cetera, et cetera.
And you also started your own podcast as well. I'm more of a videographer. I make like travel videos and stuff, but I did listen to a couple of your episodes, and but they were so insightful. What made you start a series on that?
Yeah, well, a friend and coworker of mine sent me a link to another guy that was doing a podcast, and this is a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And I do a lot of photo instructions. I do a lot of webinars. I teach a lot on my trip, so the teaching aspect is just really natural to me. And then I was like, well, how am I going to do this? Like, if you do YouTube stuff,
Mhm.
videography, I love videography, and I do a fair bit of that myself, but it takes a significant amount of time, like
Yep.
a lot of time, because it's got to be perfect. You got to really plan and set it up. But then the podcast idea, you have so much less pressure because you don't have that video component. But at first I was like, a podcast, i.e. a radio show on a visual art like photography, how in the world does that work? But I listened to this other guy's podcast. I'm like, you know what? You can absolutely explain your 5 most favorite ways to photograph elephants on safari on the radio. You just describe it. You
Mhm.
explain what the rule of thirds looks like. You explain the idea of filling the frame and what these jargon terms might be. So yeah, I just did it, and like most things in life, I just took the bull by the horns and went for it. I did some research to figure out, well, I need a good microphone, I need to host it somewhere, and of course now fast forward to today, there's more infrastructure, there's more interest, there's more people
Right.
doing podcasts than ever. So it might sound like, well, yeah, of course, there's all these platforms, but yeah, when I started the conceptualization of this a couple of years ago, it was still pretty new out there, I'd say.
Hmm. Yeah, it is like definitely it's like a growing platform. It's like there's a lot of different podcasts available, but from what like for you, I from what I heard from your podcast is like you still have a very niche, like more about like wildlife and those kind of photography, which I really like. I have a couple of my friends who are like photographers, and I sent your work to them, and even my own brother, he's a photographer as well. So they all really was impressed by your work, and obviously you are like another level of professionalism compared to them, and they really enjoyed it. And I really do recommend people to check it out if you're into like photography or even videography. Like you said, like there were some things that did help me out as well. So definitely do check it out. I'm gonna
Thank you. I
ask you,
appreciate that.
yeah, for sure, absolutely. I'm gonna ask you one fun question. Your favorite animal that you've seen so far? And I can't take three. I can only take one answer.
Just one. Yeah, I can probably say it's the Western Tarsier, found in Southeast Asia. Specifically, I found mine in Borneo. They are small primates, very, very ancestral primates, meaning like they don't, they're related to us. They're related to monkeys and apes and all
Right.
that, but distantly, similar to how like a lemur might be related to us. And
Oh.
they are about the size of a small football. They are found in trees. They're arboreal, and I think that they may be the inspiration for the movie Gremlins. If
Oh.
anybody out there has seen it, so they're really weird and interesting looking. They have huge eyes because they're nocturnal. They are carnivorous, so they're feeding on crickets and all this stuff. And anyway, they're just this really interesting animal that is, they're not actually necessarily rare in the environment. They're doing all right as a species. They don't have like a significant conservation concern. They're not like highly endangered like maybe a polar bear might be or an orangutan. But they're very, very hard to see. Like people just don't generally see them in the wild because they are found deep in the jungle at night. And so finding this little thing the size of a football clinging onto a tree in the middle of the night in a rainforest that, how deep are you really going to go into a jungle in the middle of the night? So I spotted it, or actually my co-guide spotted it, and there was this 5-minute period where I was able to photograph this little guy. And if you do check out my Instagram page, it's somewhere down there, maybe 100 or so photos back, and
Yeah.
it's really cool. Just look for the big old eyes, small tiny little nose and mouth, very gremlin-ish.
Wow, that's such an interesting answer. I'm glad I asked that because yeah, I haven't heard of this species before. but I'll definitely do check it out because it seems quite interesting and not something that many people have probably seen.
Very true. And I'll say this as well. Part of the reason I love it so much is how long I had been looking for it. I mean,
Oh,
yes, I could easily say I love lions and elephants, but it sounds weird to say, but I see them sort of so often that,
mhm.
to say that that's my most favorite. But this guy, I mean, I was looking for these tarsiers in these types of habitats on all my photo trips and ecotourism trips for about 15 years before I spotted my first one. So it was that long buildup, that
Right.
anticipation. And I was like, oh my gosh, I finally got it. And it was a pretty awesome moment.
I mean, it was more like a challenging
Yeah,
situation. It's
it
not
totally
like,
is.
yeah, and I do get that. Yeah, that's more meaningful than the other ones. Speaking of challenge, you had a splendid career in multiple different avenues. What must be your biggest challenge that you had in your career so far?
It's hard to say. I mean, you could say just the amount of work that it takes to get to where you're at, going through grad school and kind of learning by trial and error. I mean, that's sort of how I did it in terms of guiding and planning travel. I actually did not have a schooling that taught me like this is how the hospitality industry works. It was something that I really kind of just paved my way because I was in a biological sciences department, bringing ecotourism to them. So, I've definitely had some stressful trips and stressful expeditions and stressful situations. I would say probably this might relate to your audience the most, maybe
Mhm.
the most biggest difficulty or challenge was just navigating grad school. Here you are, you're in grad school,
Yep.
you have this goal, you know exactly what you need to do, but then you got to figure out your research topics. And I'll say I actually am not really an adamant researcher. I love reading the publications and I love teaching about it. But as far as doing the research, there's a reason why I'm in the travel industry. I'm not, researching monarch butterflies all
Right.
that much anymore. Is because it's tedious for me. I like to get stuff done, and there's so much patience and permitting and trial and error, and not just that's the research part of it, but just the navigating the eccentricities of grad school with what classes you take and where that's going to put you next. I would say once I got through that, it and worked really hard, it became a heck of a lot easier to do what I wanted to do.
Wow. I mean, that's totally something some of us could relate to, especially in the graduate school. But yeah, really, I'm glad that you brought that up. And so, is there like any, let's say, a fun or an interesting story that you had that comes into straight on your mind, like something that you would like to share?
Well, it's funny. I was actually just talking to some colleagues the other day about, the storytelling aspect of adventure travel and these expeditions around the world. And it's funny because you think for someone that's, traveled to, I don't know, 60 plus countries, and, I've probably led 200 plus expeditions over the years, that, I'd have just an endless stream of like just wild, crazy things. And the truth is as an expedition leader, as a trip planner, you kind of, if you want to do your job really well, you want it to be sort of uneventful on the craziness scale. I mean, you definitely want to have
Right.
fun. You want to see the wildlife. You want to get amazing photos. You want to learn a lot. You want to interact with a lot of local people and stay in really cool eco lodges and whatnot. But it's kind of funny that, I probably only have a handful of things that really went wrong,
Right.
on these trips. And those, in a weirdly ironic way, are probably the best stories. It's when things don't go to plan. I sometimes quote like, stories are made on real adventures. And
Yeah.
when you have a group of 10 or 12 people, you're trying to not let things go too out of control. But a couple of things that come to mind, like I've had some pretty wild medical evacuations where people might get injured out in the bush, in the middle of nowhere, need to get flown out to a hospital and get emergency surgery and all that. But let's not go for the tragic story. You know, I a story that comes to mind, one of my more recent trips,
Mhm.
is, well, actually, yeah, I'll tell another animal discovery story
Sure.
here.
Yeah.
This is Madagascar. This is another critter that I've been looking for many years. I did my first Madagascar trip about 15 years ago, and there's this lemur. So there's about 107 different species of lemurs in Madagascar, and they're all shapes and
Wow.
sizes, ranging from like a 3 or 4 foot tall Indri lemur all the way to these little mouse lemurs that are some of the smallest primates on Earth. In the middle of all that, there's this really weird, um, I believe it's one species of a single family of lemurs. So we call it like monofamiliar. So what it means is that like it's really different from everything else that's even closely related to. And it's called the Aye,
Mhm.
Aye lemur. And I've only seen photos of them. I've never even seen one in like a zoo or conservation center. And they're really bizarre. They kind of look like a lemur in terms of like the shaggy hair, but with huge ears, like massively
Right.
large ears. And they have this really weird, long, skinny middle finger, and it kind of looks like a skeleton. Like imagine it like extending out to here in my hand, like double the size of my hand.
Mm.
And they use that to tap and like sense for beetle larvae in the tree, and use that finger to dig it out. So there's weird, like they're actually kind of considered bad luck in Madagascar because they're so ghostly and ghastly and bizarre
Mhm.
looking. And I've always wanted to see one. And a pair of eyes was reintroduced to this forest in northwest Madagascar. And it was our best chance of seeing them because they actually had a radio collar on one of them. So they could use a little RF antenna and kind of know more or less where in the forest it was.
Right.
But these things are highly nocturnal, and you're only going to see them the split couple of seconds that they come out of their nest basically in the
Mhm.
tree before they go foraging in the night for beetles with their
Right.
weird little finger. Um, and so long story short, we scouted out the location. I was with a group. So these were guests, clients, more or less. And to get there, you have to walk over this stuff called Singy. It's Tsinggy.
Mhm.
And it basically translates to the local language as rocks that tear your shoes up, or rocks that you can't go
Ooh.
barefoot on. And what it is, it's really old limestone from like ancient
Mhm.
coral reefs that have this really weird mineral composition to basically be like razor blades. It's
Mhm.
really bizarre. Like you can go with like good boots and they're not going to totally tear them up, but we're walking on this like ancient coral reef through this forest where one slip, in other words, if you fall on Singy,
Mhm.
you're gonna be completely bloody, like everywhere, because it's all
Wow.
just razor blades. And so we had to walk on this. We had to sit on this weird little mound, like five of us on the side of
Gosh.
a small desk, looking at this nest where the eye was believed to be. And we're like, well, it's dark. Is it coming out? And I was like, man, this is sketchy. This is crazy. I can't believe we're here. And then boom, this thing comes out of its nest. We see it. I get to see my first one ever in the flesh.
Wow.
I'm blown away by how large it is. I thought that they were like, again, kind of like football size. And no,
Uh-huh.
they're like beaver size. I mean, they're like a
Whoa.
huge, huge animal. And it stopped and looked back at us, got some cool photos, kind of connected with its eyes. And it's another one of those moments where the photos I got the rest of the trip are far superior. The
Mhm.
spottings and the proximity and the cuteness of all the other lemurs I saw, were way cooler. But again, seeing this one, and this is a very, very rare species, rare to see and rare in the wild, like not many left. Is another one of those big experiences that it's kind of why we do what we do. It's those unique one-off, like, oh man, I got to see that. So yeah, that's one that comes to mind.
Wow. It seems like an adventure by itself, like just getting
Yeah.
that click. Wow, that's actually quite interesting.
Fortunately, in the storytelling aspect, those kind of experiences I do have lots of with the proper
Mhm.
planning and whatnot, like the extraordinary wildlife sightings. But the sort of cocktail party talks about like, oh man, this one time we were stuck in this mountain and it snowed us in, and like
Yeah.
there aren't too many of those. There's a lot of plane delays, but those
Oh
those aren't
yeah.
great stories.
For sure, for sure. Well, we are about to like wrap up, and you did mention about grad school and how difficult that was a challenge for you. What advice would you give people stuck in grad school, or even people that are starting their career in tourism industry, in sustainable tourism? What would be your piece of advice?
Yeah, it's an interesting landscape to come into tourism nowadays. And I'm not even talking about COVID. It's more just like how much it's progressed over the last 15 to 20 years. I mean, I think that tourism is going to be here for the long haul. There's no reason not to go in the industry. I think academia for tourism research is really coming into a big golden age. I think there's more studies and better studies and more interesting facts coming out from academia than ever before. So I think that that's a blooming part of tourism is the actual like science approach to it. But as far as advice, my difficulty with grad school was not so much the coursework. It was like how do you get from point A to point B? And I'm sometimes jealous of friends that did go to get their medicine degree or their pharmacy degree or their law degree, because it is so prescribed. It's like you go here, you take this
Right.
class, and if you pass this test, you're going to graduate in 4 years. Whereas grad school, it's just not that. So I would say just I don't think there's really a way to avoid that, but on a big cosmic level of advice, you got to stick with what you're passionate about. If
Right.
you do not like what you're doing, you're not going to be as good at it. So you need to sort of weave your own path through research or through academia or through your career goals, and just figure out, what do you really like. There's always gonna be things that you're not super fond of. I mean, there's always gonna be a class that you don't like, or a paper you don't like to read, or days of the week that are just not real fun at your job. That's always a thing. But if you generally like most of what you do and you're really passionate, you're gonna be one of the best people in the world at doing it because you love it so much. So I think
Right.
pairing that passion and love with what you ultimately end up doing, I mean, this is such a cliche, but don't do it for the money. The money will come
Mhm.
because you're so good at it, because you're so passionate, you become so good at it, and the money will come. And just look at the various industries that have spurred from technology over the last 10, 20 years. I mean, the same is possible for really any job, any business out there. So yeah, my advice is get through grad school, make the choices you need to make, follow that passion, and you're going to emerge as, the idea of it is to emerge as an expert in your field and be one of the world's authorities on whatever studies you have pursued.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much. I mean, like I could totally relate to that. Like when you mentioned about like your friends doing something else which is more concrete, and then for us to like being a bit of a nomad and trying to figure out where we belong and finding our passion. So I'm pretty sure a lot of the listeners could also relate to it. And I thank you so much for explaining that to us. And I also like to thank you so much for joining me. And this was so much fun. I learned so much from you. Like it's incredible what you've done and what you're doing. It's so much I'm pretty sure that you could go on for hours and hours. I could talk a lot more about different photography or about different sightings that you saw, and like all the other work and the places you have traveled. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. I hope the viewers have also enjoyed it. Do check out his podcast. Do check out his book as well. I already have a copy that will be on its way, so we can't wait to see all the photos you took. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jeanette. It's been a pleasure talking about this. It's fun to really relive a lot of these memories, whether it's, whether it has been some of the challenging, formidable times that kind of shaped me into what career I'm in today,
Mhm.
or just the really fun sightings that I haven't thought about for a few minutes. It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you everyone tuning in, and stay tuned for the next episode, and I'll see you guys then. All right. Take care, everyone.